Good morning, everybody. It's a real pleasure to have an outstanding panel on a critical topic because it's a new geopolitical era. We're coming from a background of fossil fuels and industrial revolutions into an energy transition that changes completely the geopolitics of what is needed for that energy transition, namely minerals. And we're shifting essentially from oil field to mining areas, pipelines to data center and power grids. So the entire framework, the entire setting for global geopolitics, globalization is now being reshuffled, and we have major competition of major countries, major economies like China being dominant in the field currently, the US, Europe, and emerging economies that want to make sure that these new resources critical for the energy transition can be leveraged to the extent possible. And we hope we can move beyond the paradigm shift of resource economy, rent-based economies into more the promise of this energy transition is really industrial economies, local capacities, factories. And for that, I think we're in a very good setting here in Tangier. We have obviously started with the harbor infrastructure that was built 20 years ago. And around this, an ecosystem has been built, and infrastructure and logistics has been developed, and to make sure that this example spreads throughout the kingdom and beyond into Africa. And so I had the privilege to chair a session on the sovereignty, maritime sovereignty, and all the strategy of global logistics. And I think to put food on the table of this logistics, it's really about access to resources and rare earth and all what's needed for the energy transition, and how we can reconfigure this new landscape most inclusively. And the African continent holds the promise, obviously, with one of the largest unexploited area for critical minerals to the energy transition, estimated at 30% of the world reserves. That provides an ideal opportunity to brainstorm and discuss how these resources can feed into a more balanced, multipolar world and leverage to the extent possible the great potential that our continent has based on its resources, its young demography, and its economic vitality. And so for that, I'm very pleased to introduce our first speaker, Her Excellency Mr. Amani, Mrs. Amani, sorry. And I'd like to address the issue of how can we shift paradigm on this resource economy from a resource rent-based economy to a more inclusive industrial base that can be developed based on the energy transition and the critical minerals that are required.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, but allow me at the outset to thank again the Kingdom of Morocco and MEDays for inviting me to this important yearly event. And I had, maybe I'm among the few who have had to continue to have the privilege of being here for, this time is my 13th time in participating in MEDays. But to introduce myself, well, I've been working in multilateral organizations and IFIs for a long time before being elected as Africa's Commissioner for Energy, Infrastructure, and Digitalization twice. I'm saying this because throughout my career, whether as from the financiers or the development expert side, and then later in life as from the political side, I came to see what's happening in the continent from different angles. Commenting on what you started with, Mr. Moderator, no, we're not going from, at least for Africa, we're not abandoning fossil to renewables. We are increasing the renewables in our energy mix, but oil, especially gas, is going to be with us in Africa for a long time. This is the first point. But when it comes specifically to critical minerals or minerals in general, it's not just energy. As we speak, critical minerals is essential for renewable energy. Is true for the batteries, but also for digital, for our mobile phones, for armament, for aviation, you name it. It's everywhere. And also to put things in perspective, what is going to happen between here and 2030, the need for critical minerals is going to increase by fivefold, 500%. And from here to 2050 by 1,500%. So there is a scramble, of course, among nations to acquire these minerals, knowing that critical minerals are concentrated in specific geographic areas. Africa, of course, 30% in total, but for some minerals, we even have 80%. Some countries in Latin America, particularly Chile, Indonesia, in Southeast Asia. So they are concentrated in specific places. And very often, in most of these cases, the country's development path is still ongoing, meaning there is still need for development, socio-economic development in our countries, particularly in Africa. So the question is, do we in Africa want to see another resource curse? So resource curse 2.0, like what happened with, or is still happening actually also with gas and oil, meaning we extract, distract the environment, and not have enough transformation industries or processing or refineries or what have you. And by the way, even our oil exporting countries, they export the oil and then they import the oil products, the refined oil products, multiple. That's much more use the revenue and multiples of that to import. So what we are seeing and what we have started doing in Africa over the last few years is that we also we are organizing ourselves and working with our countries to sensitize our countries on the importance of turning the minerals into, instead of just a source of revenue for export, and to have the damage that we're seeing, whether in labor, not always the best conditions in terms of work environment, or the destruction around areas around it, but to use it as a development catalyst, meaning to process locally, to employ local people, to use the area around the mines to develop. It's also a means for regional integration, like we're seeing in Lobito corridor, which includes 3-4 countries. So instead of having our railways, and by the way, the railways network in Africa, they have been designed by our colonizers a long time ago, and they are all mine to port. Mine to port. There are no networks, railways doesn't go from one country, African country, to another, or even some among within our country, within the city. So how to rethink the transport system, how to electrify our public transportation in the cities, how to also develop a new generation of geologists, of scientific people to work in these, to use, the climate-friendly mining methods, and turn the minerals from a curse into a development catalyst.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abu Zaid. This begs the question, when you talk about the colonial design of mine to port. Morocco is a good example. We had the port of Tangier, and obviously the railway has been improved. But the idea from the very onset, from the port, was to create an economic zone, and that transformed Morocco's economy in building a thriving automobile ecosystem that is being upgraded now with the electromobility, with gigafactories, huge investments coming in. And we discussed this issue as well on building industrial integrated ecosystems around this infrastructure.
But that was not. But the example that you are mentioning is not about the minerals. I think the better example is what the OCP, I mean, what you've done with the phosphate.
Yeah, but just to go on this topic, I did mention mobility, and I did mention electromobility with battery, with critical minerals. That's exactly where the lithium iron phosphate resource come. And so the idea is really to design an ecosystem that leverages the resources to the extent possible in global supply chains, and making sure you get a competitive offer, leveraging your resources and transforming entire industry, which huge. We're talking about, when it comes to electromobility, over $30 billion investments in our country alone. And this could also be applied elsewhere in the world. And this is why I'd like to have this session as interactive as possible and discuss also, for instance, with Karim Dahu, the issue of this model in other areas of the world. So Karim Dahu is the Deputy Director of Global Relations and Cooperation from the OECD, and has had an extensive experience in designing accession talk on within NGOs and accession talks of China into these OECD frameworks and various other countries. How do you see that unfolding in other regions of the world, and how can that example be applied on our continent?
Thank you very much. China is not yet, I think, on a course to become an OECD member, but of course, this is one of our key partners. It's a large emerging economy with a lot of systemic importance. How do I see this? I mean, first and foremost, we are putting together expertise from across expert communities at the OECD, because it's an issue that is transversal in essence. Trade is very important in order to maintain resilience of value chain. We adopt a value chain approach to this sector. In fact, most value addition lies in the downstream segments of the value chain, battery and electric vehicle manufacturing. And we face a situation whereby the upstream segments, extraction and processing, are becoming less and less profitable. And investment profitability and therefore capacity is at stake, with the risk of not being able to feed into key industries for the future, such as those that revolve around green electrification, digital, and increasingly we witness defense. So yes, trade is important because this is the area where export restrictions are progressing the fastest. We have an inventory of export restrictions that shows that in a bit more than 10 years, they have progressed a fivefold globally. So we witnessed what has happened in the run-up to the APEC summit in Korea, with the restrictions on export licenses of rare earths by China, but it's much beyond China. Indonesia has restricted export of raw nickel to attract investment in smelters and beyond electric batteries, export licenses on nickel as well in the Philippines, Democratic Republic of Congo, Namibia, you name it. There's a risk with that, because if value chains get further fragmented, the costs will increase, and the adoption of the technologies that feed into the green transition in particular will be at risk. It will be complicated for everyone to tap the full potential of value addition that lies throughout the supply chain. Indonesia has been quite successful in this. They have managed to attract battery makers from China, BYD Korea, LG, SK, and they are on the verge of having investments in electric vehicles by manufacturing Tesla and BYD again, but the conditions that prevailed over the success of Indonesia are not necessarily met everywhere. Cost of electricity that is a third of the one in for competitors in nickel in Australia, for instance, which has crowded out of the market Wailu Metal, BHP, others, the French Eramet in New Caledonia, the Goron mine, and very much coal-based, and some nickel deposits, which are very significant. So it has allowed them to shift from 5 to 60% of the market in the space of just 5 years. But yes, these conditions, this availability of infrastructure, etc., is not energy infrastructure in particular. Mining is very infrastructure intensive, water intensive, energy intensive, cannot be met everywhere. Africa has a potential now with the breakthroughs in solar, because solar has become very cost competitive. It shifted from in a bit more than 10 years, €3 to now we've got less than 4 cents sometimes the kilowatt hours. And countries like Zambia, for instance, even if they defaulted, they were almost the first, together with Ghana, to default. Their equity markets are booming also because of breakthroughs in the electricity system. The electricity utility of Zambia has had 3 rounds of bonds emission successfully. So yes, Chinese solar panels in particular in the copper belt make a difference. But everybody is not going to be able to build batteries. And in fact, the Europeans have tried, Northvolt in northern Sweden, and a few years after they met successfully several investment rounds and gathered $18 billion, they have a few months ago started to file the bankruptcy files under the US law. So this shows, I mean, shifting from like a startup to mass scale production and doing the adjustments in the chemistries of batteries without too much waste is a real challenge. And today, the only ones that have successfully managed this cycle are Asian companies, mainly China, which dominates overwhelmingly 2/3 of the market. It's cattle is the giant, 35-40%, and you have BYD and smaller companies. And then the Koreans are still resisting, 15-20%, LG, SK, and a few others of the market. And then the Japanese are declining with 7-8-9%, Panasonic essentially. So I think we need to be lucid that it will be difficult for, it's not every African country that is going to build batteries from scratch, but you can attract investors as well, you know.
Sorry, Karim, I interrupted. Yeah, that begs the question on the role. Actually, you know, we're 14 kilometers from Europe, and we got next week a discussion on CBAM and the role of Europe. We've seen how Asia positioned itself in that field quite consistently, with the failure of Northvolt. What would be, and this question is addressed to Fabian from the European Policy Center in Brussels, how can Europe jump in this market using its legal frameworks of the CBAM and the trade it has over the continent with particular countries? And we've seen also synergies between, for example, China battery makers that have stockholders like Volkswagen inside building their batteries in Morocco for the European market. So we can see joint ventures moving in. The idea is to see what would be the strategy that Europe would adopt to try to jump in a highly strategic market for the current energy transition.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to speak again here. Just to state at the outset, I'm from an independent European think tank, so I don't speak for the EU, but certainly from a European perspective. I think it's important really to take a step back and say what is driving Europe at this moment in time. And there we've seen a very significant change in the mindset of how Europe looks at the world. Because what we have experienced over the last years is a weaponization of interdependence. And that has very much shaped policy in Europe, and it is continuing to shape policy in Europe. We've seen that weaponization certainly in our relationship with Russia, with particularly gas. But we've also seen it, not for the first time, it has to be said, but much more noticeable now in critical raw materials and in particular export licensing from China, which has had a big impact on European industry. So for Europe now, the question is, how do we address what hopefully is not a trilemma, but how do we address achieving competitiveness and affordability at the same time as security and access, at the same time as decarbonization and sustainability. And I was saying, I hope this is not a trilemma, because I hope it's not that we have to trade off one against the other. But the reality is that if there is a trade-off, then security will have to come first, given the situation which we're in. And that's also where I would very much emphasize that critical raw materials here are not only important for decarbonization, for digitalization, but also for defense and security. So Europe will have to have a safe and sustainable access to the critical raw materials which are needed to build up the defense and security, which is going to be a dominant theme over the next years, whatever happens next with the war of Russia against Ukraine. So I would say we are moving towards a framework which I would call resilient openness. Europe recognizes that it cannot be closed, it cannot be protectionist, but it has to be resilient in doing that. And a number of policies, and I can go into it. I know you don't want us to give long opening statements, so I go into it later on. But we have the Critical Raw Materials Act from last year. We have a number of partnerships which are developing. There's investment in circular economy to make sure that we retain as much of the material as possible. Much more research, but also more diversification. And that means also new partnerships, including with Africa.
Thank you very much, Fabian. This brings me, and indeed, I want to make sure your statements are as short as possible to make sure we give everybody an opportunity to discuss the topics, including our audience, where we'll leave the Q&A session in the last part of the roundtable. And I'd like to address Professor H.E.Dr. precisely on issues of security and geostrategic priorities for Europe, and how can a country like Morocco address these questions pertaining to its closest neighbor.
Je tiens à vous remercier de votre invitation. Je suis très content d'être avec ces experts, ces personnes qui sont hautement très impliquées au niveau du savoir et de la connaissance au niveau des matériaux rares et aussi de les minéraux rares. Je pense aujourd'hui, il faut dire que la guerre mondiale ne se déclenche plus aujourd'hui pour des territoires visibles, mais pour des ressources invisibles. Les minéraux rares, c'est eux qui vont alimenter la puissance mondiale. Lorsque vous voyez aujourd'hui les systèmes embarqués des avions de chasse de 6e génération, vous voyez à quel point aujourd'hui, quels sont les matériaux rares, le cobalt, les matériaux critiques et stratégiques sont très importants dans ce genre de choses. Par exemple, quand vous parlez des missiles hypersoniques avec un Mach qui dépasse le 25, donc vous aurez besoin des terres rares, vous aurez besoin des matériaux critiques et stratégiques. Donc, de fait, aujourd'hui, le monde aujourd'hui, il est fragmenté parce qu'il y a un besoin, parce que tout le monde sait très bien qu'aujourd'hui, celui qui va contrôler les matériaux critiques, les minéraux critiques, les terres rares, le cobalt, le phosphate, et aussi même que contrôle le graphite et le nickel va contrôler la technologie. Celui qui va contrôler la technologie, il va contrôler l'histoire. Et je pense aujourd'hui, c'est ça ce qu'on doit comprendre, parce qu'aujourd'hui, nous sommes en train de travailler et de parler sur l'utilité à l'échelle micro des choses, mais l'échelle globale des choses exige aujourd'hui un regard géopolitique, un regard stratégique. Ce qui se passe, par exemple, quand vous parlez du cobalt, vous parlez de la région de Kivu Nord, vous parlez de la région de Kivu Sud, de la RDC. Alors, vous parlez du problème de Katanga. Donc, vous parlez du problème de M23. C'est un mouvement séparatiste qui a été alimenté par des grandes puissances. Il ne faut pas dire, il ne faut pas essayer un petit peu de chercher donc d'autres explications pour essayer d'avoir la main mise sur ces matériaux critiques et ces matériaux stratégiques. La même chose partout dans le continent africain. Là où il y a des matériaux critiques et des matériaux stratégiques, on voit qu'il y a des enjeux géostratégiques qui dépassent parfois la vision de citoyens de ces pays. Donc aujourd'hui, la souveraineté des États, elle est posée en question. Donc c'est pourquoi on doit chercher de travailler sur d'autres concepts qui est capable de faire aujourd'hui que le continent africain qui aujourd'hui dispose des matériaux critiques et des matériaux stratégiques qui pourraient lui permettre d'avoir sa place dans la géopolitique de l'énergie. Donc, on doit travailler sur d'autres concepts. Moi, c'est pourquoi je dis aujourd'hui la communauté internationale, les grandes puissances. Par exemple, quand je vois par exemple les accords qui ont été signés entre les États-Unis, la Nouvelle-Zélande et l'Australie sur le cobalt. Ça, c'est des choses qui doivent nous éveiller. Ça, c'est quelque chose qui nous doit nous interroger. Ça, c'est quelque chose qui nous doit aussi nous dire, voilà, l'ordre mondial futur, va être basé, centré sur la technologie, sur l'intelligence artificielle. Mais cette technologie, si on n'a pas, par exemple, les matériaux qu'il faut, les matériaux stratégiques qu'il faut, les matériaux critiques qu'il faut, donc on ne va pas se voir, donc on ne peut pas être dans la compétition, dans la concurrence. Et donc, de fait, lorsqu'il n'y a pas donc, la résolution de l'équation, quand on n'arrive pas à décrypter les paramètres invisibles du système de l'équation, donc la résolution, elle est fausse. Donc, on tombe dans la rivalité, dans les guerres. Donc, c'est pourquoi aujourd'hui, c'est très important de dire aujourd'hui que le continent africain, c'est un continent qui est très important parce qu'aujourd'hui, on parle de fracture polarisation. Les fractures dans le monde aujourd'hui et les fractures futures vont se baser sur les matériaux critiques et les matériaux stratégiques.
Alors, pardon, juste pour donner la parole à Amin Legdiri, justement, Ridi, pardon, sur justement la souveraineté minière. Alors, par rapport à ce nouveau concept de la souveraineté minière, et on reviendra sur différents aspects de cette approche, comment le continent africain, sur la base des pays souverains, peut développer à la fois au niveau national et au niveau régional ces nouveaux concepts de souveraineté minière sur ses ressources.
All right. Since English seems to be actually the elected language of the table, let's stay with English. Wonderful. I enjoyed actually listening to each one of you, and there is no interruption. There's always continuity with my dear brother, actually, Professor Rodani. Let's invert. Let me take off my hats and everything that you know, and let me talk as a humble citizen, a little bit expert in the field. What don't we want? Let's start by that. What we don't want is mines somewhere in the Sahel region producing gold and having slavery. As we are speaking together in this very nice room, nice AC, enjoying our water, there is still slaves. There's still forced labor. Terrorist groups, extremist groups are kidnapping women and men through networks that are supposed to take them somewhere to Europe. In the middle of the way, ways that we cannot see in Google Map, furnished by oil and gas in stations that doesn't exist in any of the maps that we know, in places where there is no telephone coverage. They kidnap him in the middle of the way. Women go to things that I don't even want to talk about or imagine. And men are forced under two things. If you are strong, they give you actually machines. If you're not strong, you will work until you die. That's as we speak. Okay? That's what we don't want. That's why it's very important to protect the sovereignty of the nations. That's why it's very important to not joke in any possible way with extremism and with terrorism. Let's be very clear on that. That's what's very important also to protect the value chains. Because what is happening today with the instability in Africa, my continent, our continent that we love, is that there is what we call a black market of services that is growing. Not just for weaponries, but also for other things. For raw materials, for critical materials, for sometimes, unfortunately, even oil and gas. There is a market for logistics, for transportation, for securing actually from where satellite maps are, but also for providing basic things such as water, food for those groups. That's what we don't want. Now let me diminish my tone and talk about what we want. What we want is human dignity. What we want is prosperity. And I do not see this as contradictory actually approach. We can work together. As a matter of fact, my two first conferences on the matter of oil and gas and mining were in the US and were in Asia. And it seems that everybody wants the same thing. They don't want lawsuits. Big firms do not want lawsuits. They want value chains that are respectful of the law. That's the big guys. So where is the problem? Maybe in the intermediate guys. Where is the problem? Maybe somewhere in the logistics value chains. We need to build sustainable, resilient, as you said, Khalid, resilient value chains. It connects between the final customer, big multinationals, that can even actually start producing big parts actually of their products here in Africa.
But I mean, sorry to interrupt you. The idea of the middleman we've seen with the US, the legislation on corruption and extractive resources has been downscaled by the US administration. So
Khalid, just stay with me because I'm not learning by heart. I'm thinking. I'm trying actually to produce a line here. So just stay with me because my speech, I can repeat it very easily. I'm trying to bring new ideas to the table that we can work on. Value chains. Value chains today are very important. Today, when we are talking about the port of Dakhla in Morocco, the big idea is not actually to be using the local resources in the south of the country. The big idea is helping international value chains cure real problems that they have today, which are problems of disruption, which are problems of quality, which are problems of selection of the right producers that will actually provide the right products all the time. Creating an enabler, catalyst for exports from all the African continent first, source for foreign currency, source for stability also through value chains, but also creating more value for our friends in the US, in Asia, and all around the world. The idea also is about creating an immaterial hub. And I will end just with this idea because it's about being interactive. When I started my career in the maritime, in the logistics, and then actually in the infrastructures, many of my customers were back then actually from the mine energy sector before I even actually switched it to this. And I noticed that the final cost was mainly immaterial, not physical. It was transportation, as you mentioned. It was engineering. It was certifications. It was studies. It was training. All this was done abroad. And there was no way actually to be doing the certification locally. There was nowhere to do a JORC report. There was no way even to do the engineering locally. So the idea about projects such as the port of Dakhla in the south of Morocco is not actually to have the monopoly, at the opposite. It's to bring also this expertise closer to Africa. And to rebuild, to rethink the norms. We were talking about sovereignty. I think this is the major theme of this conference, or of this roundtable, don't worry. Normalization is a very strong way of influence. Laws are a very strong way of influence. We need to abide by the international laws, but it's very important to bring them also closer to the needs of our continent. A cluster of training, cluster of certification, cluster of engineering, full solution, not just exporting mining or energy products, solving actually the needs of disruption of the value chains. That's what the world is looking for today, with clear off-takers. Because when you have the clear off-takers and the clear value chain, you easily have the investment that follows. Thank you for your
thank you very much. I mean, yes, please.
Just three quick comments. I mean, you mentioned that the big firms, they don't want lawsuits. I beg to differ, because what we are seeing, the mining company in the world, I mean, they are very few and they are giants. I mean, and we know who they are. They are the ones actually distracting. And what is sad is that we did not, in our countries, except very few, enforce ESG, strict ESG standards. So I'm saying this because I do not wish anyone to think that they are angels. No, I'm sorry. They did atrocities. And we've also seen the killings. We've seen the murders that happen in many and around mines, maybe not the rare minerals, but we've seen what happened in iron ore and bauxite, and we know them. So they are,
I've actually lost friends to that. We had friends actually that's died there. So very important. Thank you.
they are also very much questionable in this environment.
Indeed, and that brings me to closer to our region with the case of Libya and Anas. How can a country in the current state then try to anticipate the global competition and position itself with whatever it can? We have similar cases all over the continent of trying to prepare the grounds for leveraging its resources in the current context, for example, in Libya, and how can that be applied elsewhere in Africa?
Thank you so much, Khaled. And again, I want to thank Amadeus for the kind invitation, for Morocco for hosting us, and to be back now, also like Dr. Bouzaid for the 13th time, I believe. So we're both veterans, but I think the youngest on this panel. So I want to be very clear. I want to be clear. Maybe I feel like I'm the youngest on the panel, but I think when I get asked questions like this, and I want to be quite honest and personal, right? When I get questions like this, when we talk about energy sovereignty and we talk about these economic resilience, I feel like I'm speaking to CEOs, right? But everyone around this table here is younger than I am, right? Sitting around. So I want to speak to you because this is a conversation about you. I'm going to pick up exactly where Khaled left off, right? He said that we've been, for far too long, we've basically been defined by what is under the ground in Africa, not what's above the ground. And that's a major, major problem, right? So let's paint the trees for the forest here. If you export everything that you own and then go back and buy it back, it's like living on a farm, selling all your vegetables and then buying them back from the person that you sold it to. It's a joke. It's a joke. You asked me about Libya. Libya is the best example of this. Libya exports 1.2 million barrels of oil a day and has the highest imports in the entire region for oil, and one of the smallest populations, only 6 billion people. The Century Foundation in the US just released a report saying that we get $6.5 billion a year that is smuggled out, to Amin's points about smuggling and trafficking in the continent. So we sell our oil, buy it back, then smuggle it out, and we've lost $20 billion a year for doing so. Who are the recipients of that? How do you create a value chain around that? So when you think about the dilemma that we have, you can think about it in terms of it being a resource curse. I think of it as a governance curse. I think our real problem is that, and you look at the dilemma that Libya is facing, is that a place without institutions, you're going to find very, very quickly, and you learn very quickly, that when you have a vacuum, nature loves a vacuum. Others will take over it very, very quickly and move you away from it. So statistically, yeah, Africa has 30% of the country's resources, or the continent's global resources. But it also has something that other economies that we mentioned earlier on, I think Karim was mentioning China from the offset, are fearful. By 2030, we'll have more young people in the workforce in this continent than the world combined. The median age on the continent is 19. So when you're thinking about Karim's point, or Khaled's point, sorry, when you're thinking about how do you move forward, you have to have a national plans are just one thing, right? You have to have a vision, and you have to have a little bit of a soul. You have to remember that when we're talking about resources and we're talking about extracting, we're talking about economies, we're talking about people at the end of the day. So you need to create that value chain by investing in your people to make them understand how not only can it just trickle down to their pockets, but they feel empowered by these resources, that they're not buying it back. I think Amin's point about mining was so interesting. You go out and you mine cobalt, right, and you mine lithium, and then you buy it back at 20 times the price. If we continue with that paradigm, Europe is going to see us in Libya and the rest of the continent. It's going to see us as an energy tap, as a resource tap, and the plumbing is going to be political. It's always going to be political because if they have problems with Russia, they're going to want us more. They're going to create more dependency on us. So I think it's about combining that. And honestly, I mean, it sounds a little bit soft, but have a soul. Have a soul when you think about these issues, and remember, it's about the people that we're speaking about in this room.
Thank you very much, Enes. It couldn't be more telling about what's coming up. And you mentioned Seoul plans and the region with global competition. And I can see no other example in the around the table than Central Asia, where you have we have Franz Josef Marti, who's an expert in the region and who can tell us a little bit about what's at stake in this region, because it's at the crossroad of China, Russia, European, and perhaps also US and other players' rivalries. And how can this region then develop this soul, these strategies, and implement a leveraging of access to their critical resources?
Thank you very much. So I would just make one brief point in Central Asia as it strikes me here in Africa. One thing is there are huge opportunities. This figure of 30% of global reserves of critical minerals is often cited. The point that I want to make, and this plays into sovereignty or dependency, is actually nobody exactly knows. Because in Central Asia and in most of Africa, there have never been comprehensive geological surveys. So very often it is unclear where these minerals exactly are, or whether they can be mined in an economical manner. As just because you have some sort of deposit doesn't necessarily mean that you can exploit it. So the point that I would underscore is if Africa or Central Asian countries want to be more sovereign in this regard and own these opportunities, one critical part would be to educate geologists that local countries can do as much as possible of these geological surveys. Because nowadays it's basically all these giant multinational corporations that do these surveys because they have the expertise and the locals don't. So that, in my opinion, is the best way to seize these opportunities. And I will keep it short as we discussed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Franz. That brings me back to the continent and the southern part of our continent in His Excellency Mr. Lesotho Magoti, former foreign minister of the Kingdom of Lesotho, a country that is located next to an economic powerhouse, namely South Africa, that has very strong influence on access to critical minerals. And how can a country like Lesotho then leverage its resources within that context and to reach out to the global community to try to leverage its resources most effectively? Can you enlighten us on the particular challenge that Lesotho can have, a country like Lesotho, in the current global dynamic of rivalry over resources?
Thank you for the opportunity to be part of this panel. I believe for a country like Lesotho to be competitive in the global market in terms of resources will be the idea of first defining independence. The independence that most of African countries are celebrating, and in our case, it will be the 60th anniversary of independence. The big question is, do we really understand the independence, or is it just an empty shell that we inherited from our colonizers? In terms of what have we been doing going forward that we can say tangibly we are truly independent because of the resources that are being eroded, that are going out. Lesotho is quite rich in alluvial diamonds. Extraction of them, they go out, as raw as they are. One speaker said from Libya, we are producing oil, but then we're buying it back and we become a joke, just like us. We don't have much on our diamonds. They are mined and taken out to Netherlands. They are processed and sold. If there are those who are rich to buy them back in the country, they buy them at a higher price. However, what I believe in will be the idea of, do we have policies in place that are truly defining ourselves? Do we have regulations in place that are truly defining ourselves? Do we have regulations in place that are truly defining ourselves? If we do that, it ideally creates an environment where we can say we have a stable politics. We have stable politics, we'll have a stable economy. In terms of stable economy, we will be creating a position where we can be a destination for foreign investment. Investors can come in and invest confidently. The former commissioner said the fossil fuel and gas, as much as we want to do away with it, it's going to be with us for a long time. And decarbonization is still going to be a challenge. How do we truly move around in terms of ensuring that we gradually move into green technology? We can move into green technology at any time. Anybody wants to move into green technology, but the initial setups for green technologies are very, very expensive, as much as they are affordable, but it's expensive to have green technology in place. So what we can do is to ensure we partner with the right companies, Triple P. And with the Triple P, that means we can actually match our youth to be trained so that we create a skilled workforce in the process. As soon as in the process of creating a skilled workforce, we are also addressing the issue of unemployment, which is quite a challenge for us. And then with the green energy that is stable and affordable at the ground and grassroots level, it means all people are going to be affording having an affordable green technology and green energy.
Talking about green technology, green energy, and Morocco's first trade partner that is located right across the sea, 14 kilometers away. We've seen how Spain and the good neighborhood policies of that both countries have implemented have resulted into tremendous economic growth for both Spain and Morocco, referring, for example, to the automobile ecosystem, to even the harbor infrastructure that is pretty much combining both countries' expertise. And we've seen how that resulted into jobs. We've seen how Spain is also engaged into renewables, desalination on massive scale to have also climate resilient agriculture. So taking this example and your background in the Spanish government, Catalonia, and also NATO issues, you're obviously a member of the European Union. How can this partnership between Morocco and Spain be extended to other countries in the region for the benefit of both countries? Georgie, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for inviting me. And we didn't coordinate the question, but thank you very much for this question that allowed me. No, we didn't talk. We didn't talk, even with this 1 hour in advance to meet. That is too much. Today, at this time in Barcelona, is the ministerial meeting of the Union for the Mediterranean. This is the European Union tool, the European Union dimension, institutional dimension of the partnership between the north part, the European part, and the south part of the Mediterranean. Let me be clear with my full support to the European Union integration. In this moment, this is a very low and unsuccessful results in this European partnership with the Euro-Mediterranean policy. To be here in Tangier once again, it's a fantastic pragmatic approach to this relationship because it's 14.5 kilometers between Europe and Africa. It means between Spain and Morocco. So first of all, we need to recover these 30 years of European partnership with the Euro-Mediterranean policy, to recover and to rebuild the best parts of this agenda. It means common market, it means labor market, it means common standards between the two parts. And for the moment, the second biggest gap in terms of DGP in the world is this 14.5 kilometers. The first one is between North Korea and South Korea, and the second is in this area. If we take into account all Africa and all Europe, this is exaggerate. If we compare Morocco and Spain, obviously is different, and regional integration is possible. We are facing a new scenario, namely from geopolitics of oil to geopolitics of rare lands and rare capacities, and then the challenge of EI and the centers for EI and the research for EI. About oil, we have already the clear map about where is the oil in the world. About the rare lands, we don't have a clear map about where are the rare lands. You already mentioned, Excellency. We don't have a clear map. Now, a few years ago, we discovered some oil and gas around Cyprus, in front of Israel, but was a last notice about this. In general, we have a map about oil. We don't have a map where is rare lands. Secondly, it's possible a cooperation between developed countries and other countries underway to develop. Let me to move to the beginning of the oil companies industry. Everybody knows in the room the well-known Nobel Prize, Nobel, the family Nobel. Do you know where starts Alfred Nobel, the fortune? In Baku, at the beginning of 20th century, in a quite well-agreed compromise between these men from the north, from the Scandinavian country, with the people in the Caucasus. Some quite balanced win-win agreement. And then he became a well-known man, fortune, and now the velvet diplomacy of the Nobel Prize and other Nobels. Well, but at the beginning is the oil in the Caucasus. What we need is something similar about the relationship between some countries, I can't say Western countries anymore, some companies with Africa and with Eastern Asia and other parts of the world, to agree with some common and good standards. And this is all from my side in this first round. I hope to have a second round. We are in times of fragmentation. We are in times of deep interdependence where everybody tries to say that is full sovereign. And we need to take into account this new frame.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jordi. And this brings me, I really look at what Spain has done in our desalination program and resilient agriculture. And it's kind of a telling example of what can be done with renewables and an inclusive social economy, which is agriculture, which is the biggest economic sector on the continent. Would you like to add something?
Yes. Just one figure, one data. Two big champions in oil, namely Emirates and Azerbaijan, they led two consecutive COP28 and COP29 in order to show the world that it's possible to combine, to invest in renewable energies and to keep the accounts about the traditional oil company. And this is the smart way to performance in the world. And Aramco in Emirates is a powerful company around the world, and they combine and they invest in renewable energy and they keep the resources. So this is the way to combine both.
Absolutely, and there are also other models of in the oil business that affects non-producing countries, namely in the Nador West Med, which you have interesting developments coming up with supplying Africa with refined oil products and storing it, and going beyond the gray zones of where the oil is coming from, with indeed support from the United Arab Emirates and other players. And going back to the desalination and social economy and the promise of renewables, I'd like to address Chris H.E.Dr. Basically, how can the continent benefit from this booming and tremendous cost reduction in solar PV, for example, to sustain its biggest economic sector on the continent? Click again.
Thank you so much for the question and for being here. Great honor to be here in this great group. Also for the invitation from Amadeus and from the Kingdom of Morocco. It's one of my favorite places to be. This is the third time in this MEDays event, and I'm delighted to see His Excellency H.E.Mr. When I was a U.S. diplomat based in Cairo, my wife used to joke that my second home was the headquarters of the Arab League. So, sir, Ya Fendam, pleasure to see you, and pleasure to see so many young people around the table. I am, after leaving the U.S. government, I went to Rome to lead the Secretariat of the Committee on World Food Security. And we spent years and years developing policy prescriptions, very in-depth scientific reports about the problems of hunger and malnutrition. And it's all written down on paper. They're great reports. But is that being implemented? The question, or the answer is obvious, no, right? Africa has the highest food insecurity numbers in the world. It has the most armed conflicts that are causing so much hunger and malnutrition. And so that question of governance really is at the heart of everything we do. And just because it's written on paper, Kenya, for example, has a wonderful system. You can read all about it, but is the application, is the implementation followed up? No, it's quite hard. And Amin has pointed out some of the negative legacies of where rules are not applied. So my work now, I teach at Sciences Po. I teach about the politics of global food security. And in my spare time, I design resilience workshops, basically stress testing workshops for food systems under the Food Alert label. We did a large workshop last year. In fact, EPC was one of our partners to stress test the European food system. We brought policymakers, farmers, NGOs, academics, and we put people through a 2-day stress test simulation to see where the vulnerabilities are for Europe. So great, Europe is doing well. Africa, that kind of discussion, that kind of work, stress testing, to identify vulnerabilities, to strengthen resilience, that's an area where we can be very hands-on in terms of strengthening those kind of the muscle. So I highly recommend that we look as a community into strengthening that policy resilience, right? Food security is defined, food sovereignty and sovereignty in general for minerals and other African resources, very undefined, right? We all have a feeling of what sovereignty means, but it's giving yourself options, right? Having a plan B, a plan C for your oil, for your minerals, and being strong enough to say, maybe you're not the best partner. If it's copper mines and the environmental pollution that is the result of those copper mines, when there's an environmental disaster, that's the kind of thing that Africa is living with. And there may be the rules, but there's a chance to strengthen the muscle, the muscle tissue to make the sovereignty stronger and resilience stronger. But in terms of your question, right, the water is a key element. What I'm working on now with an NGO I started this year is to promote agrivoltaics in Africa. And agrivoltaics, simply stated, and in fact, we're talking about this on his farm potentially, and a workshop that we're designing in Paris to promote agrivoltaics in Africa. And that's the co-production of solar energy and agriculture. Africa is the best place in the world for solar irradiation. The food security needs are tremendous, And the production, you can see the needs are there, but how do you develop the markets using these techniques, which combine, it's at the nexus of food, energy, and water. And that's the toughest thing to get your energy minister, your agriculture minister, your water minister, your finance minister, thinking, planning, talking together. So that's, we're trying to do that.
Thank you very much, Chris. And you did mention, obviously, vulnerability. You mentioned muscle. You mentioned also food security, global food security. Morocco has obviously a very strong role to play in global food security, as it holds 70% of the world known phosphate reserves, critical for fertilizer. May I remind the issue during World War I that the world population will be limited to about 3 billions. And then Haber came up with the synthesis of ammonia, and that led us to being 7, almost going to 8 billion people around the planet. And obviously Africa has the highest arable land, the reserve, and obviously the most critical food security needs. So there are examples of what OCP is trying to do the most efficient appliance of fertilizer around mapping the African soils. But in terms of vulnerability and the role of major countries that can impact this sector, I'd like to address Dr. Maya Goppel, who just joined us. And as you know, Morocco holds a great promise in global food security, but also holds great promise in implementing the energy transition on one of the fields where, for example, green hydrogen is the most promising, namely in the fertilizer, where half of the world's hydrogen is being used. And we'd like, Morocco has come up with a green hydrogen offer, and we see very shy responses from markets. And we know that Germany has it high on its agenda. How do you see, how can a country like Germany address low-hanging fruits on the continents to try to catalyze this and speed up this energy transition?
Well, thank you very much for being patient. My sincere apologies. I was double planned on the other panel, where we've talked about especially the kinds of relationships that would be important now in order to find the notions of reliability and resilience. Maybe those are two terms I would like to plant on this table, especially when we see that there's more erratic behavior on the side of the otherwise most intense trading partner, the United States. And also when we think about common interests, obviously we have migration as a huge concern between our two continents, but also how do we proceed on finding pathways into a new industrial model. I mean, this is what the Germany stands for, to say we do want to stay an industrialized country, and we do know that we have to do it in a decarbonized way in order to live up to the challenges of climate change, but also to think about what are potentials in terms of having export chances and new technologies out on the horizon when we take other issues like resource scarcity into account. So circularity is becoming a strong emphasis right now in the way that the industrial sector is innovating. Also to think about how we use new technologies, AI, etc., vertical models rather than large language models, to really say there should be an industrial base, and at the same time being cognizant that there is a shortage of the resources that are required for that. So we're heavily import dependent in terms of rare earth and other materials, but also especially on food, as we were just there. We don't grow at all enough for providing for our populations. So there is a natural win-win notion, and I think geographic vicinity and the joint challenges of migration around the Mediterranean should be a no-brainer to really move forward on those items. I cannot really answer why our government finds it very difficult right now to go full steam for that. It's at the core of a lot of industry leaders as well to say, where is that zigzagging course coming from? Why can't we really pursue what we said where we want to go? And it is making it difficult for investors from the outside to really understand where is this course going. And especially the steel industry being highly dependent on what you said now with the green hydrogen, we have a breach between some of the companies saying we want this, we push, and some are being laggards. So we have within our own industrial fabric and within every sector, we have leaders and we have procrastinators. And right now we find it very, very difficult. The associations don't help because they are the ones that are sitting at the table typically in policy shaping, and they have minimal consensus in terms of what they bring to it. And right now there is, I think, rising disquiet in Germany to say, how do we get those long, loud legal signals and clarity in terms of where are we going with this? And I just really can encourage everyone from business to speak up, because I can tell you, being a scientist, they don't really want to listen to us right now anymore unless we can prove it's economically sound. So we have to have new alliances pushing for that agenda, but the rationality and the logical conclusions that this should happen are all on the table.
And in terms of economic resilience, we see how a country like Germany is really threatened in its very industrial core, namely in the automobile sector and the electromobility. And we see how China is moving in very aggressively in this field. And so basically that brings me to our last but not least speaker, Antun Duzmovic. Sorry, and basically you coming from Croatia, and how can a country like Croatia build an economic resilience based on the current trend of energy transition, where actually access to critical minerals and alternative scenarios become highly relevant to your country, for instance?
Thank you, Khalid, and it's my honor to be here. I'm here for the first time. But let me just remind you that Croatia has long experience with the cooperation with Africa. I come from the institution that's now called Institute for Development and International Relations. It was founded in 1963 under the name of Institute for Africa. So I come from a country that was in between the Warsaw Pact countries in Eastern Europe and Western Europe, and we found our niche, and Africa was our niche, and my institute dealt with a lot of research there. During the 90s, we shifted more to European integration. We joined the EU in 2013. We are a Mediterranean country and also Eastern European country. So we are affected with things in the Mediterranean, also in Eastern Europe. But we are looking for new connections with Africa, and I will just inform you that in 2 months from now, we will have a big delegation coming to the Kingdom of Morocco. It's our big honor. I hope to join the delegation. Probably it will be headed by our Prime Minister in February. I just mentioned Russia. We mentioned a lot of countries. Germany is our major trading partner. Our economy is so dependent on Germany because they have big automotive industry. We export parts for their industry. On the other side, just like Germany, we were also exposed to Russian gas. Until 2008, we produced 90% of our gas locally. Unfortunately, for some reasons, Croatia stopped new explorations. And just at the dawn of this full-scale invasion in 2022, we found ourselves in a situation, where we, dependent on the Russian gas, and we lacked that imports, and we shifted our attention, and luckily to the south, and luckily, we have really good location, as I said, in between Eastern Europe and the Mediterranean. And at the same time, just a year before we commissioned our LNG terminal on the island of Kirk near our Rijeka port, near Italian border. So it's ideal port for countries like Austria, Slovakia, Hungary, for Central European hub. And actually, Croatia is now using European funds. As I told you, we joined the EU in 2013, just 12 years ago. And we have abundant funding, and now we're using this money, I would say, prudently. We are now investing in the regasification of the country. We are making new interconnections with Hungary and Slovenia. But at the same time, as we speak, we have ongoing projects of building new pipelines. We are also building, hydrogen connection. And we hope to import hydrogen from Northern Africa. I also mentioned Russia. We have a huge petrochemical industry. And they found themselves in problem because of, lack of gas. And this is also another opportunity for a country like Morocco as a major phosphate importer. We imported a lot from Syria, and we could, I think, shift our attention also to Morocco. Coming to your neighbor, Algeria, last year we started importing LNG from Sonatrach. We're talking here about Africa. I believe they're the biggest company in Africa. And we are thrilled, to diversify supply chains. So it used to be Russia, and now it's two smaller countries. It was Qatar, mostly the United States shale gas, and now from last year we have gas from Algeria. So there are a lot of developments. I will just also remind you that Croatia has e-cars producer. We are also developing batteries. This is also another part where we can cooperate on the mineral imports. And it's really important that, as I said, due to our strategic sort of position at the heart of Europe, Croatia is now presiding. Croatia took over presidency of 3 Seas initiatives. We have excellent cooperation with the Visegrad countries and Poland. Together with Poland, Croatia was one of the founding nations of this great project that now, within the light of Russian aggression against Ukraine, is falling its value. And also we are presiding EU Med. So EU Med countries, 9 Mediterranean members of the Med. So there are a lot of initiatives there that will open doors between our country and Northern Africa, especially Morocco. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Abu Zaid, would you like to add something?
Very quickly, because I mean, seeing where the discussion is going. Allow me to just reject the victimhood approach when people around the table talk about Africa. It's as if we were just sitting, waiting for someone to prescribe something to us, and that we're victim of the situation. I'm rejecting it because we proactively have a vision for minerals for Africa. We are starting, rethinking the Mining Act with a regional approach, so as to also have a unified, common approach when it comes to the beneficiation from critical minerals in a way that one country would not be able to do by itself. We have a country like Zimbabwe that is already starting the lithium concentrate, $300 million facility, so it's starting. We have one of the leading world examples when it comes to the transparency and governance of in mining, that is Botswana, which is a shining example in the world, not just in Africa. We have also the you mentioned, I mean, phosphate. Phosphate has been not only that you develop the value chain for Morocco, but phosphate from Morocco has been and continue to be a major vehicle for regional integration because it's used across the continent in agriculture. We have 8 African countries that are starting the production of green hydrogen led by Egypt, Morocco, South Africa, Kenya, and others. So, and these are efforts that have started proactively from our countries, and they are not just dictated by someone else. Where we see the problem is that we want the value chains to continue, not just, and to be developed, not just for export. I'm saying all these examples because many of this, that you don't see the reflection in our countries. We have not seen this being used in our transport system, in the agriculture, in many of the examples that have been. So our appeal to our countries is that, please, we understand that this constitutes a fantastic source of revenue, but we have to balance things out. So what is for revenue, yes, but also the local needs, and to use it as a vehicle for a modernization and upgrade of our systems. I wish also for us to understand the major weakness that is contracts and legal aspects of mining in Africa. Very often we don't have the teams, except very few countries in the continent, the teams that understand the complexity of a legal framework of a contract when it comes to extraction. And that is why Africa also has developed a legal facility for mining and for extractive industries to support our governments do that. So a regional approach, and I think this is very important for us to understand that what is l'enjeu, the game here is much, much bigger than one country to do it on its own. So we would have to really come together in that and have a proper approach, which we are to apply it so as to also be a major player and competitor in this field. Last but not least, just understand as we speak, the batteries that we are having now are much more efficient. They use much more less lithium. Some are even cobalt free. So the peak, yes, there will be a peak, and then it will go down. Unless we diversify our economies, we will relive again a very, very serious situation.
Thank you very much. Before moving into regional contracts and regional infrastructure with our Moroccan colleagues on the Nigeria-Morocco pipeline, I'd like to have Karim, because he has to leave early, come up with an issue that he'd like to raise.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just a couple of points, and I apologize because I have another commitment, but I would like to jump on the point raised by Amin that companies do not like lawsuits and U-bonds on it. Commissioner highlighting that compliance was far from being achieved in this sector. This is clear on a range of issues: human rights, environmental, tax policy, transfer pricing is mainstream in the sector. This said, there's a cost to non-compliance, and if we want projects to take off, especially large projects, etc., it is very important and to remind companies that they need to carry out all the necessary means to be compliant. The largest project on copper, the global annual demand is 30 million tons with a potential of 3 billion tons. So to supply the market for like 100 years is under arbitration at the moment because some constitutional provisions regarding community consultations have not been carried out. The largest iron ore project, I don't need to mention the name, we all know it, 15 years delay because of lawsuits and compliance issues. So when we talk about fast tracking, we cannot stress enough the importance of ensuring ESG compliance, and beyond ESG, of course, addressing other risks. To the contrary, a country like Chile, where I was just about a week or two ago, is quite heavy in terms of its institutional requirements, its ESG requirements that are enshrined both in the law and in contracts, but private investors seem, at least even if they complain a bit about red tape, to enjoy the predictability that it ensures. Stop and go is the worst for an industry whose life cycle is very long. It's 20, 30 years. So that's an important element. And this takes me to the second element that I wanted, and last element to mention, which relates to technology substitution. Because if you're not compliant, you see the importers, the buyers are going to switch, and there will be R&D to avoid the risk that a particular mineral is raising. This is very much what's happening with cobalt. We are the guardians of a guidance on due diligence for responsible mineral supply chains, which we have developed with countries from the Great Lakes region to allow them to access value chains even if they are plagued by conflicts. It's been endorsed by the European Union. It's the basis of their directive. It's listed in the Dodd-Frank Act. If you want to exchange cobalt in the LME, the London Metal Exchange, you need to abide by it. But the fact that cobalt remained tainted by numerous human rights violations and other issues has prompted China and other actors to engage into a lot of R&D to change the chemistry of the batteries, and that's what has made, in particular, LFP, on top of the cost dimension, the iron phosphate batteries gradually take over on NMC, nickel, manganese, cobalt batteries. So, and this relates to my last point, which is technology substitution. We need to guard countries on locking themselves in like one mineral, you know, then can lose a lot of its value because LFP has taken over on NMC, but there's a lot of research on solid state, sodium ion batteries. So if we want to avoid the the kind of commodity swings that have marked the commodities market, the price swings that have marked the commodity markets in the past, it is important to factor this element and rather to work on an investment framework that is robust, you know, than on trying just to develop one minerals. And I stop here and I apologize for having to leave you.
Thank you very much, Karim. And in terms of being locked in the technology, what better example is regional infrastructure that will bring all of West African countries together to have still an access to great resources that are available in various transit countries as well. I'm talking about the Nigeria, Morocco, and extensions to Europe pipeline. And I'll ask my Moroccan colleague, Amin first, and then Professor Sharqawi next, on what are the strategic, what is the economic resilience dimension of such a project?
You can say also professor, but thank you very much. It's all right. It's all right. Very good. Let me focus on one specific point because we need takeovers. It's very important. And we are also not talking just among us. I'm very happy actually to see in this format that there are so many people standing. This is not actually a Layun room, but is actually supposed to be welcoming a lot of people. This is a very technical discussion, and yet people are standing and even coming over. So let me focus on one takeover. Karim spoke about something very interesting. He spoke about Chile. When you arrive to Santiago, they tell you that the airport of Chile is germs-free, thanks to the technology of CO2 plus used locally to kill all the germs. Very beautiful and strong statement. They are saying that it's not just la empresa chilena del cobre that is ruling, but there is research and development, there is locally actually value added, and they are exporting value, not just the rocks. Keep this in mind. When the Kingdom of Morocco launched the important actually strategy that is today reality to help in Africa contribute humbly, because it's part of our elements of language, humbleness, but concrete actions to fight food and security. It wasn't just about a technical jump. Technology was there, but it wasn't just about technical jump. And please listen very carefully to what I'm saying. It wasn't just about importing a knowledge to know how to transform something called P2O5, add some ammonium here, and I have the scientists in front of me, add some sulfur to have something stable that doesn't explode in your face, and then you add the N and the K, N being the nitrates, and K being the potassium, and you have something called NPK that saves us all from hunger. It wasn't just about that. It wasn't just actually to replace something that existed over 200 years before, which is saltpeter. Keep that in mind also. It was a diplomatic move. We created a joint venture with our American friends. What I'm saying is public. You can find it actually in the official newspapers. We created a joint venture with our American friends, with a company that is also dear to my heart, Jacobs Engineering, one of the world leaders of engineering. I had the honor and privilege of visiting actually their installations in Florida and met with people, very young people, whose average age was above 76. Each one of them was a temple of knowledge. Each one of them knows very well, not just our continent, but all the minor residents in all around the world. And the idea was not just to transfer the knowledge, the idea was to make our American friends win more money by this joint venture than by just importing the rock from Morocco. And making the world make more money and achieve something strategical, that is food security. This is what we are speaking about. This bottle of water, no matter how generous I can be, is not enough for all of us. We need to learn how to work together to make wells that will be everlasting. And those wells can transform into water dams, and so on.
Thank you very much, Amin. We have many other topics, and you go ahead.
So, straight to the point, please. It's not just about technology, and I heard what you were saying very carefully. It's very smart, actually. It's about proofs of concepts that work on the field. And it's a way to get the world win more money. That's what makes stability on the field. That's what kills interference. And then once you do that, once you make all your friends actually make more money through stability, they reduce somehow the interference. Let's be very practical on that. When you want to succeed on projects, please think about the final off-takers and about who is invested and who are your round table. And when you do that, think about solidarity and bring also local companies. That's how you create even more stability in the field. That's what you were saying also, in other words, because you need practical people to walk actually from the countries in the field. That's my final off-take. It's not just about mining. It's not just about technology. It's not just about money. It's about being smart enough to bring people around the table to do things together and have totems that work. Because when you have something that works, then you become the next pilgrimage destination. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amin. And so going from the Bone Valley and the Florida phosphate reserves that have been depleted in the 70s when Morocco decided to triple the price of phosphates, my father being an executive at OCP, you know, US colleagues were telling him, you know, that was crazy to just triple. We just produce and we sell at cost. And they were selling at $2-3 a ton. And Morocco was tripling that price. And we've seen now, 40, 50 years down the way, that these reserves have been depleted, and Morocco comes in with its strategic reserves. And it shows how the importance of building up the transformation of these resources, just like OCP has done with Maroc Chimie and Maroc Phosphore, and now the upcoming combination of renewables. I just want to focus on that regional dimension that Morocco has developed with sharing gas resources regionally and providing access to, for example, natural gas for all West African countries, and how that can stimulate other initiatives, regional initiatives. We've seen the Atlantic Harbor of Dakhla, how this can also contribute to break the enclavement of landlocked countries. I'd like to have your take on how this deal can be a game changer for the continent.
C'est une question qui est très importante, très intéressante, avec une vision un petit peu géoéconomique mondiale. Et géoéconomique qui concerne un espace qui est très intéressant, très stratégique pour la paix, pour le développement et pour la sécurité mondiale, à savoir l'espace afro-atlantique. Je pense aujourd'hui, lorsqu'on parle du phosphate, on parle d'un matériau stratégique. D'ailleurs, ça fait 15 jours que les États-Unis, ils ont mis en place, ils ont essayé un petit peu de réactualiser leur papier stratégique en mentionnant le phosphate comme l'un des matériaux stratégiques et l'un des éléments critiques pour la sécurité nationale américaine et mondiale. Étant donné que le phosphate, comme vous le savez bien, c'est un élément qui est très important pour la sécurité alimentaire, pour la résilience et aussi pour beaucoup de choses. Lorsqu'on parle de la technologie LFP, lithium phosphate, fer phosphate, c'est une technologie qui est très avancée, que le Maroc est en train de mettre en place pour une projection géoénergétique. Et de fait, aujourd'hui, le Maroc, il rentre dans une nouvelle phase à travers une vision royale sous le leadership de Sa Majesty le roi Mohammed VI, qui a mis qu'aujourd'hui, il faut qu'on crée une autonomie stratégique. Une autonomie stratégique, d'ailleurs, avoir la force de projection géopolitique. C'est-à-dire aujourd'hui, le continent africain, surtout à travers des accords bilatéraux et multilatéraux, le Maroc fertilise beaucoup de terres agricoles à l'échelle du continent, notamment la RDC, notamment l'Éthiopie, le Kenya, donc, et plusieurs pays européens. Et de fait, le Maroc, c'est un vecteur qui est capable aujourd'hui de travailler avec ses partenaires, avec la communauté internationale sur la production alimentaire. D'ailleurs, les contrats qui vont être signés avec Bujumbura très prochainement rentrent dans cette perspective de travailler l'agriculture à l'échelle du continent africain. Au niveau de l'énergétique, je pense aujourd'hui, il faut dire, le Maroc, il a mis en place une initiative des corridors. C'est l'initiative des corridors de la souveraineté partagée. La souveraineté partagée, c'est une souveraineté fonctionnelle qui fait ensemble que le continent africain peut travailler sur la mise en place et sur un écosystème cohérent des corridors, que ce soit des matériaux critiques, des matériaux stratégiques. J'ai par exemple, quand vous parlez, madame, tout à l'heure de lithium lithium transformé en, par exemple, en Mozambique, c'est ça? Donc, oui, donc je pense aujourd'hui, il faut que le Maroc, il voit les choses avec une manière très stratégique, mais qui est capable d'adhérer davantage, de créer tous les mécanismes et les approches pour faire adhérer le continent africain. Vous le savez très bien, aujourd'hui, le continent, il est dans une fracture, dans la dislocation. C'est pas des problèmes c'est pas des problèmes effectivement, il y a des problèmes géopolitiques, mais je pense aujourd'hui, l'approche marocaine, c'est de créer une interconnexion, une interdépendance en matière d'échange commercial, de travailler, de trader between the countries. Donc, je pense aujourd'hui, le Maroc, il rentre dans cette vision géopolitique qui dépend de nord de l'Atlantique, la doctrine géoéconomique américaine avec les pays européens, et avec la doctrine géopolitique One Round, One Belt de la Chine, parce qu'aujourd'hui, la Chine, il se positionne sur les matériaux critiques et les matériaux stratégiques. Vous le savez très bien, 80% du cobalt, 70% des lithium, et même dans les pays africains que vous avez cités, c'est les entreprises chinoises qui sont derrière. Je pense aujourd'hui, le Maroc pourrait rentrer dans une stratégie plus globale qui dépend de plusieurs doctrines géoéconomiques et géoénergétiques, à savoir les Russes, les Chinois, les Américains et les Européens, pour qu'on puisse travailler sur le continent africain qui pourrait aussi jouer un rôle dans ce mix énergétique qui est en train de s'installer à l'échelle internationale. Mais je le pense, je le dis, donc aujourd'hui, il faut essayer d'avoir un écosystème industriel capable d'accueillir la nouvelle technologie pour le continent africain. Et de là, il faut qu'on travaille sur la transition numérique, la transition énergétique, la transition de la technologie, parce que ce retard qui existe entre le continent et les pays en développé ou bien en voie de développement, c'est un retard qui est très important. Il faut essayer un petit peu de trouver avec des stratégies multidimensionnelles, des stratégies horizontales, verticales, pour qu'on puisse arriver de trouver des solutions adéquates pour le continent. Tire profit aussi de ses ressources énergétiques, mais aussi d'avoir la possibilité de se repositionner dans un système mondial équilibré, équilibriste. Je pense aujourd'hui le Maroc donne l'exemple parce qu'à travers ces initiatives des corridors partagés et de la souveraineté partagée qui est en train de se mettre en place à travers le pipeline entre le Nigeria passant par plusieurs pays africains, à travers la production de l'hydrogène vert, à travers la transition numérique, la transition énergétique et ce modèle qui s'exporte. D'ailleurs, nos amis au Sénégal travaillent aussi sur le même modèle du Maroc vert, de l'hydrogène vert. Donc, je pense aujourd'hui, il faut qu'on aide, qu'on essaye de travailler sur une vision et avec une responsabilité partagée à travers aussi le souci de dire que donc ce qui se passe dans le continent, cette rivalité, cette dislocation, je ne vais pas vous donner l'exemple de ce qui se passe en Libye, ce qui se passe dans le Soudan, ce qui se passe dans d'autres pays, dans le continent africain, dans le Sahel, l'Afrique subsaharienne du Sahel, cette dislocation, c'est inimaginable quand vous voyez la ville d'Opti ou bien la région d'Omopti ou bien la région de l'Optako-Gourma ou bien la région des trois frontières entre le Mali, le Burkina et le Niger, l'une des régions les plus riches par les matériaux, les terres rares et le cobalt, et sont les régions où ils s'immiscent des groupes terroristes comme le XIM, le soutien islamique, les musulmans de H.E.Dr ou bien Daesh. Je pense aujourd'hui, il faut qu'on travaille, il faut regarder les choses avec sagesse, avec responsabilité et aussi avec conscience, parce que ce qui se passe dans le continent africain, il est inimaginable. Un continent qui regorge beaucoup de matériaux critiques et stratégiques, mais malheureusement continue de traîner derrière les pays développés. Je pense aujourd'hui, le Maroc donne l'exemple d'un pays qui projette la stabilité, pourvoyeur de la stabilité, pourvoyeur de la sécurité, pourvoyeur de l'intégrité territoriale des pays, parce qu'aujourd'hui, il faut le dire, 19 mouvements séparatistes qui s'immiscent dans le continent africain. Il faut qu'on arrête ça. Il faut que le continent commence à travailler, et ça passe par les grandes puissances qui doivent assumer leurs responsabilités, à savoir les États-Unis, la Chine, la Russie, la France, les pays de l'Union européenne et l'Occident d'une manière générale. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. Je note les mots-clés finalement d'autonomie stratégique, d'innovation et surtout de coopération d'une approche régionale dont le continent a besoin. I'll open the floor for the audience. If you have any questions, feel free to jump in.
Attendez, Khaled, mais s'il vous plaît, parce que quand on parle d'intégration régionale, on va pas, c'est pas une aspiration que nous allons enfin, là, on ne va pas embarquer. C'est un effort qu'on a commencé déjà il y a plusieurs décennies. Peut-être l'audience ici n'est pas bien informée, mais déjà les projets régionaux et le continent regorge de projets régionaux basées sur des stratégies communes, régionales et intercontinentales. C'est vrai qu'il faut le dire aussi, que, puisque là aussi j'étais responsable de l'Afrique, nos problèmes étaient plutôt centrés autour de la région nord, où il y a eu toujours des difficultés pour accepter des approches communes sur certains points, mais ceci n'amoindrit en rien les programmes, que ce soit en matière d'énergie, en matière de numérisation, en matière de route, en matière d'éducation et autres, continentaux et régionaux à travers le continent, qui sont phares et qui sont extrêmement avancés. Donc, je vous invite aussi à prendre connaissance de ces stratégies et des projets et des programmes, et c'est bien sûr Internet, je peux même vous donner le lien, mais ce n'est pas nouveau, c'est peut-être nouveau, et nous sommes heureux de voir que la région Nord enfin s'intègre de manière un peu beaucoup plus rapprochée du restant du continent, mais non seulement Nord-Sud, c'est-à-dire Maroc et pays de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, mais on aimerait voir aussi l'Afrique du Nord adopter des systèmes et des programmes régionaux, à savoir que l'Afrique du Nord est la région la moins intégrée du monde entier. L'Afrique du Nord, particulièrement. Je n'entrerai pas dans ces détails, mais moi je marque les faits. Mais à savoir que sur le continent, il y a énormément de programmes et il y a vraiment une approche extrêmement réussie sur différents secteurs.
Merci beaucoup. I give the floor before going to the audience to Dr. Shusla. Jordi, the floor is yours.
During your proposal to organize this, you suggest to react. I want to react briefly, but in front of Mr. Laghidi, but Laghidi is not here. That he's a brave man who delivered the speech. No, he said something relevant and positive, that is necessary to share prosperity and to be inclusive for the future of the economics and the growing economies. And in general, this happened much more now than in the past about this colonial mentality, with one relevant exception to share benefits and incomes. And this is China. I just described, it's not against or in favor. China is around, but China doesn't fulfill usually these commitments, even in the paper, in the contracts, to share benefits. Even if it's in the papers, mainly. I was just to say this, not in favor or against, just to say that this is a challenge. Second, about partnerships, I think that we are much more better now than in the past, not only for countries, and that integration and cooperation is useful and possible, not only in terms of country to country, in terms of private companies, consultancy, and countries. And that for some countries, a good international company with transparency could be much more better. And last, I have a previous and decent life as a politician. Now I am in my second life. When I was in parliament 19 years, this kind of rhetoric about leadership and the strategic leadership, I consider this as a business institutes of blah, blah, blah. And now I really study this from the out of the box. And I think that to take clear decisions in politics is very important. Yeah. And I see much more out of the box than inside. And I see this because now the countries with this kind of lands must take clear vision about the future, about international relations and partners. Mutandis, what happened in Ukraine, my full solidarity with Ukraine in front of Russia, is because Ukraine didn't set up a clear vision about the future. And it's not necessary to be in one block or in the other block. It's necessary to say from the beginning, this is from a country, this is my or our multivectorial foreign policy. And to be in depths between one and the other and not have a clear vision about what you want to do, then this is part of the problems, the mistakes, the founding for independent movements, and so on and so that. So this is another point. Thank you.
this is a very good example of what African countries should get inspired from, not to align with one party or another, but rather to leverage all potential partnerships for the sake of local capacity buildup and inclusive economies, particularly in the context of green energy transitions in particular. Is there any question, anybody from the audience? We'll have Fabian and
just briefly, I think the problem is not so much agreeing on objectives, because I think there's a lot of agreement on what you're trying to achieve. But as an economist, I always say, well, there are all these common sense things to do, but why are they not happening? So I think what we really need to focus on is what are the barriers for these sensible things to happen, which include short-termism, both within companies and governments. It includes additional costs and how you distribute those costs. It includes endemic uncertainty and polarized risk, which is affecting all of us. And that means we live in a second best world where we have a lot of unintended consequences of the actions. And we are in a context of a highly politicized geo-economic environment where a number of governments are taking strategic actions which are distorting markets, having an impact. So I think it's those areas we have to focus on. Because I think overall, I wouldn't see much disagreement on the objectives we're trying to reach.
Yeah, and the means are particularly telling because you're talking about long-term strategies, and we got the challenge of governance and rules, and we have seen how China long-term strategy has paid off in terms of renewables, and it's very difficult to challenge a model that is based on very long-term, that goes way beyond private corporations and politicians in the rest of the world. So you need strong, dedicated leadership for a significant amount of time to be able to deliver on a vision. So we'll take 3 questions. First, Fathala and...
Oui. Merci, notre ami Khalid, pour la modération. Dr Abdelhafid Oualalo, vice-président de l'Institut marocain des relations internationales, politologue. Je pense que nous sommes dans un espace de dialogue, mais aussi de dire la vérité pour les générations, mais aussi pour nos amis qui ne connaissent pas beaucoup le continent africain et surtout l'Afrique du Nord. Vous avez parlé d'un taux d'intégration qui ne dépasse pas les 3%. C'est malheureux. C'est à cause des frontières fermées entre l'Algérie et le Maroc depuis 1994, à cause de cette question du Sahara marocain. Ça, c'est une vérité qu'il faut le dire. Et nous sommes à Tangier et on est censé comprendre ce qui se passe chez nous. Je suis interpellé par une question qui s'est posée lors de la COP 16 qui s'est tenue à Marrakech. Et il y avait une initiative, l'initiative des 3A, Afrique, agriculture, adaptation. Je voudrais savoir quel est le devenir de cette initiative qui a été portée par les pays africains sous l'égide de Sa Majesté le roi Mohammed VI, sachant très bien que l'OCP joue un rôle déterminant dans la sécurité alimentaire en Afrique, pas parce qu'il donne des engrais spécifiques à nos amis africains, mais aussi parce qu'il participe dans ce cadre de partenariat gagnant-gagnant, à savoir la fabrication locale des engrais et des fertilisants. L'exemple frappant, c'est en Éthiopie, où il y a un site de l'OCP pour la fabrication et pour l'ammoniac. Je pense que l'OCP, troisième pays, troisième exportateur dans le monde, est premier au point de vue réserve. Et c'est un premier champion de l'économie marocaine. Tant que ce sont des vérités, donc il faut aller dans ce partenariat et non pas de l'assistanat. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Je pense que votre question est en fait dirigée à Dr Ameni. Justement, vous avez été impliqué dans le financement de ces initiatives dans votre mandat précédent au niveau de la Banque africaine de développement. Qu'est-ce que vous avez à dire?
Enfin, en tant que pour la Banque africaine de développement, nous avons travaillé avec l'OCP justement, enfin un grand contrat qui s'est fait avec l'OCP, encore pour pour cette portée régionale et je suis enfin vraiment en connaissance, tout à fait en connaissance de ce que l'OCP fait et a fait et continue à faire à travers le continent. Mais à savoir que l'initiative, parce que c'est là où il y a la question, l'initiative qui a commencé il y a quelques années dans le COP pour l'agriculture. Je ne suis pas spécialiste agriculture, mais je sais que cela a été tourné en stratégie continentale pour l'agriculture. Et encore une fois, je vous invite à consulter parce qu'il y a encore il y a énormément de projets qui étaient mis en place entre-temps. La chose, il y a deux éléments là qui peut-être ont causé cette, enfin pas confusion, mais qu'on n'en parle pas. C'est c'est le besoin ou bien c'est tellement immense, enfin c'est tellement immense que peut-être que ça se voit pas tout de suite. Deux, le continent a un faible majeur à faire savoir et à communiquer les bons exemples et ce qui se fait sur le terrain. Ça, c'est vraiment a failure, et je dois l'avouer. Mais, et malheureusement, ce n'est pas connu, souvent, ce qui se fait sur le continent n'est pas suffisamment connu par les Africains eux-mêmes. Et on continue à perpétuer des phrases et des idées qui sont presque révolues. Mais c'était juste pour savoir que non, l'initiative est bel et bien vivante, mais encore qui a beaucoup plus d'ampleur et de dimension, et c'est en mise en œuvre.
Merci beaucoup. Alors, allez-y, je vous en prie.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Salwa, je suis de Tangier. Je suis entrepreneur et étudiante en Master 2 à l'université Al-Malik ici à Tangier, la région du Nord. En fait, mon intervention, je vous remercie avant tout pour vos précieuses informations et interventions. Alors, ce que je voudrais dire, c'est que, à part encourager, vous avez parlé des efforts marocains, africains et régionaux pour la promotion de la notion de coopération africaine pour le développement. Et je voudrais aussi mettre le point sur un point de formation qui est mis en place actuellement par mon université et le master auquel je suis étudiante actuellement, c'est en économie de développement durable et innovation. C'est aussi pour former des jeunes, former des cadres pour suivre cette coopération et être un petit peu autonome et avoir des cadres propres à nous. Alors ma question est la suivante, comment ces jeunes ils peuvent intégrer ce mouvement régional africain pour promouvoir le développement durable, la coopération, green energy et autres stratégies très très importantes et prometteuses pour le futur. Et je vous remercie pour votre écoute.
Je vous remercie pour votre question très intéressante. Qui voudrait répondre à cette question?
Je peux, si vous voulez.
Bien sûr.
Bon, je reviens sur la question de l'intégration. Madame, maybe you... No, please go ahead. Maybe you, because I spoke too much.
Thank you very much. No, I actually tied on well because I was going to continue on what are we not doing economically in the way that would allow for the clarity and the business models and solutions to thrive that can build up the sustainable solutions. And externalization is one of the prime ones. You're mentioning short-termism. The other one is really the ignorance towards social and ecological costs. And there I think there is a conflict on the table right now because Europe is trying to push in that direction with things like CBAM or with the pricing of CO2, with standards, with taxonomies, trying to differentiate between sustainable and non-sustainable investments. And it's often looked at as an inhibition to economic success still. I mean, it's so outdated the way that we are doing economics when we're absolutely externalizing the costs, not only the short-termism, but also the already now happening ones. So how do we find solutions that allow for this to be on the table, which allows for then other business models to make it bankable, to be more sustainable? That's the next step we need to go to, from reporting and to collect the data on risks, but also opportunities, to then say, how do we get it into accounting? So there's a whole move of how do we do economics differently to see what we're destroying right now and to see what can be built if we do things differently. And then we have all the potentials of using a strategy on a resource-rich continent to provide for a new model rather than going into extractivism. And some of you have alerted point to you, because that's not going to help neither the development of the regions here. And I fear that, especially one more addition maybe to why Europe's finding it so difficult to push through on this and to maybe be more practical, is that the US is blackmailing every political agenda right now in the European continent. And obviously they want, I mean, 700 billion that Europe is supposed to buy in energy commodities that are not renewable, but fossil-based. We don't even have that amount of money. We have never expended so much money in 3 years on it, and I don't think they even can produce it. But this is the environment that Europe is trying to work under, and I think it would be fantastic to see which aligned governments in terms of having a vision of how can the solutions look like, so it's actually benefiting people and help us stay within planetary boundaries rather than ripping them apart and have a race to survival. That is exactly where we need to correct the economic models so we can have different success stories, and we have to have the means of collaboration. And if it's not taxation and tariffs, how can we look at them differently and call them standard setting and have mutual investment agreements around them, but have the directionality built into the economic instruments that we are going towards decarbonization and regenerative economies?
Thank you very much. Dr. Abu Zaid, would you like to add something?
Yes, maybe I will directly answer your question. What you're talking about is exactly what we have been and continue try to do across the continent. I don't know of an area of specialization, whatever it is, even high tech, that does not exist somehow on the continent. The continent is very rich in talents. However, the movement of talents across the continent is very much difficult. Very difficult because either we don't know about what's happening somewhere, we don't even have this rationale of having a coalition, from different companies across the continent to apply for something, and that's what we're trying to push. When we talk about integration, is that it doesn't have to be 100% Moroccan. It could be from 5, 4, 6, 10 countries across the continent coming together, for a common good. So what is happening now is that when we talk about the implementation of the free trade area of Africa, one of the elements is also to allow the talents to move. And when I established the African single market for aviation, now having 39 countries, is to allow people to move cheaper flights and more easily. Same thing goes for the single energy and the single digital and the transport networks and so on and so forth. So far, we're still having physical inhibitions or barriers because we cannot move because either the transport itself does not exist or is not affordable, or we do not even know what is happening next door. So, and yes, in North Africa we're having still issues, and it's not just not the conflict you mentioned or the issue that you mentioned. There's even much more. There's not just that. But we're seeing regions that are working beautifully, visa-free, where free movement of people and talents. In your region, South Africa, in East Africa, there are wonderful examples across the continent. But we want this to be, a common story, not just in sporadically or certain areas, rather than that. Free movement of people and talents across the continent is going to be, or should be, the norm and not the exception. Okay, and just to bounce back on what you just said, I totally agree. As Africans, I don't think that it's should not. Again, we still have fragmented economies, fragmented and sometimes even competing legal frameworks when it comes to extraction and other things. That's why we are pushing for a common mining act that is also modern, that is responding, and in line with what's happening around the world, and in terms of technology and other developments. But what we're seeing is that corporate shopping for the weakest link, and then for a power or a company to infiltrate in and try to use the situation to its benefit. We have an opportunity now. And the opportunity is that this whole area of extractive mining or mining was a blind spot for the whole world, with the exception of China. And we must also commend that they have a 100-year strategy, except for China. Everyone we all woke up one day to find what's happening. Now the companies, the mining companies, the governments, the importers, the investors, they are exposed. They are now, everyone is exposed. They are under the radar. So this is really an opportunity for the whole world to rethink the whole process from A to Z, because otherwise we will not survive. No one will survive.
Thank you very much. Very interesting points on skills and talents sharing within the African continent. Before yielding the floor.
Just a little addition. I think it's important to focus not just on extraction, but also on processing and on circularity. And I think there's scope for a lot more partnerships also in those areas, just as an addition.
Anas.
Yeah, I want to just jump in really quickly to respond to Professor Gopal and also to Fabian. I mean, one of the first things I think is that obviously when you think of the cost of capital in Africa, it's, I think, believe 12 to 20% more. It's 3 to 7% here in Europe. Yeah, 3 to 7-fold, right? So I mean, you know, the sun is free, but the money is really expensive. So that's one of the major issues that we never speak about. We normally have bankers around the table. I don't know if we have any bankers in today, but that's one of the first things, right? Bring down the cost of the capital so that it becomes easier. Harmonizing the standards, I think, is really important. But something that you mentioned from the outset, Dr. Bouzid, about, you know, about decolonizing this. I mean, there's a joke that I had with a friend of mine, and I said, if you break an old pipe in Africa, the British Empire might fall out, right? I mean, it's literally that old. Right, and they're not designed, you know, they're not designed for any kind of common integration. So that's one of the major issues that we have as well. How do you interconnect a continent that was designed only for extracting? So if you're going to move forward with that, I think having, and I think it's a point that Duyan mentioned earlier on about Croatia's journey, right? Croatia's journey into the European Union. Europeans decided that they would give up a portion of their sovereignty, right, in exchange for a lot more prosperity. And I think in Africa, we've got that problem, right? We're not willing to give up any portion of our sovereignty. I mean, even an inch of it, right? So if we're not willing to do that, that's a problem. And I'll leave it on this final point. If you want to have a long-term vision for sustainability, right, and for green tech, you're thinking about 20-year horizon planning, right? But a lot of the continent, the politics is changing every 18 months. Combined with the fact that they don't want to give up that sovereignty. So those, for me, when you think of the interest rates, the cost of capital, but also when you get right down to the nitty-gritty and the political, I mean, you said geopolitical economic uncertainty, right? That's what you were talking about, Fabian. I just think it's part of the nature today that we have a lot of interference and we have a lot of change that's so sporadic that it will trip up any kind of long-term journey that we're looking for.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Anas. Very good point in answering questions from the audience. Please, go ahead.
Merci beaucoup. Je m'appelle Guy Marius Sagna. Je suis député du Sénégal, mais je suis ici surtout parce que je suis député de la CEDEAO, du Parlement de la CEDEAO. Je suis ici avec des collègues députés, oui, des collègues députés. Monsieur Soklembe du Togo, qui est aussi député de la CEDEAO, Madame Ndaou, députée sénégalaise et députée de la CEDEAO. Alors, moi, je vais essayer de parler de manière honnête. Je suis d'accord avec tous ceux qui ont prononcé le mot souveraineté, parce que c'est de ça dont il s'agit. Mais qu'implique la souveraineté? Il faut qu'on soit concret. La souveraineté de l'Afrique signifie moins de parts de marché pour des pays en dehors de l'Afrique. Et c'est tout à fait normal que ces pays ne fassent absolument rien pour que nous soyons souverains, parce qu'ils ne veulent pas perdre de parts de marché. C'est de ça dont il s'agit, et de rien d'autre. Le Sénégal, 4 fois plus grand que la Hollande, des terres arables et du phosphate. Et pendant des années, c'est la Hollande qui nourrit le Sénégal en oignons. Ça n'a pas de sens. Ça n'a pas de sens. Et je donne l'exemple du Sénégal dans ce domaine-là, mais c'est l'exemple de tous les pays africains dans tel ou tel domaine. Ça n'a pas de sens. Alors le Sénégal est en train d'inverser petit à petit la tendance, mais quand le Sénégal sera souverain en oignons, ce sera des parts de marché en moins pour la Hollande. Comment la Hollande va nous aider? Comment la Hollande va nous aider à être souverain? Mais non, parce que le gouvernement hollandais, il a le capital hollandais derrière lui. Et c'est valable pour tous les autres pays. Nous ne demandons pas la charité. Nous n'avons pas besoin d'assistance. Nous avons des terres arables, nous avons des scandales géologiques, nous avons des scandales miniers. Quelqu'un disait, l'Afrique a la forme d'un revolver et la gâchette se trouve au Congo. Donc ce n'est pas étonnant que le Congo ne soit pas stable. Qui contrôle les mines là-bas? Oui, l'Afrique a la forme d'un revolver, regardez. Et le Congo se trouve ici. Mais on ne va pas laisser l'Afrique contrôler la gâchette, sa gâchette. Voilà la situation. Et donc, il faut sortir de cela. L'exemple, l'expérience marocaine, l'expérience maghrébine même, dirais-je, et particulièrement l'expérience marocaine, est intéressante. Vous prenez votre indépendance. 2, 3 ans, maximum 4 ans après, vous créez votre monnaie. Vous sortez de la zone franc. Pourquoi? Parce que vous avez compris qu'il faut nécessairement avoir la souveraineté monétaire. Sinon, pas de développement du Maroc ou de l'Algérie, d'accord, ou de la Tunisie sans souveraineté monétaire. Nous avons encore des pays africains qui ne sont pas souverains monétairement. Et vous pouvez multiplier cela dans les mines, dans le cobalt, etc. Voilà les problèmes auxquels nous sommes confrontés et que les Africains eux-mêmes, depuis des décennies, connaissent. Sauf que ce qui se passe, c'est qu'on a assassiné ceux qui étaient porteurs d'un projet d'une Afrique souveraine, qui dépend d'elle-même, qui ne va pas mendier au monde, etc. Donc il faut continuer, il faut continuer ces expériences, il faut continuer la solidarité et la complémentarité, parce que le projet d'un Sénégal, mais souverain, durable, le projet d'un Maroc souverain, durable, c'est aussi le projet d'une Afrique qui sort de la pauvreté. Parce que si une partie de l'Afrique est pauvre, ces pauvres vont venir au Maroc, vont essayer de traverser la mer Méditerranée, vont passer par l'Algérie ou la Libye pour essayer d'aller vers l'Europe, en fait, forteresse. Voilà à quoi nous sommes confrontés et il est possible de transcender cela comme d'autres pays à travers le monde qui ont été colonisés ont pu sortir de cela.
Merci beaucoup pour avoir relevé la forme géographique de l'Afrique à celle d'un revolver avec la gâchette à son endroit et on comprend bien pourquoi effectivement ce doigt sur la gâchette doit être contrôlé par ailleurs. Alors, avant de passer sur l'autre question, juste une remarque assez pertinente, c'est que la chance qu'on a en Afrique, c'est d'avoir cette forme de revolver avec un bon exemple géographique, mais il faut savoir que cette gâchette existe dans d'autres pays dans le Grand Sud et avec exactement les mêmes problèmes. Donc, je ne peux que vous féliciter d'avoir relevé ce détail géographique.
Écoutez, c'est très facile, c'est trop facile de dire les colonisateurs. Ils ont quitté, ne serait-ce que de manière officielle, enfin je ne parle pas des autres entrées des colonisateurs, ils ont quitté le continent il y a des décennies. Et donc il va falloir aussi qu'on prenne notre destin en main. Pourquoi vous avez fait appel à une compagnie hollandaise? Vous êtes sûr que vous avez cherché sur le continent, vous n'avez pas trouvé une compagnie ou une entreprise africaine, surtout en agriculture. My God. Enfin, les meilleurs sont en irrigation, agriculture, l'Égypte, et puis vous avez le Maroc qui veut ceci ou cela. Non, mais il faudrait aussi savoir qu'il y a une question culturelle, qu'on fait toujours appel à l'homme blanc. Mais il va falloir aussi dire la vérité, qu'on trouve beaucoup plus pas facile, culturellement acceptable de faire appel à quelqu'un de l'extérieur et non pas à un Africain. Et c'est ça aussi qu'il faudrait changer. Culturellement, les pays que vous avez cités, que je viens de citer, que ce soit mon propre pays, l'Égypte, ou bien le Maroc, ou bien les Kenya, et autres, tous les talents existent. Les entreprises, et je sais quelque chose parce que j'étais aussi du côté financier, je sais ce qui se passe sur le continent. Et à propos, la BAD, par exemple, l'Union africaine et autres, nous donnons des avantages financiers sur les appels d'offres aux compagnies africaines plus que les autres. Sauf qu'il faudrait aussi réfléchir à cela et ne pas continuer à dire les colonisateurs. Sinon, on ne s'en sortira jamais. Mais votre pays, mon pays, les autres étaient colonisés aussi. Mais il faut faire autrement. Et payer le prix pendant un certain moment, faire des sacrifices pour s'autonomiser aussi. Il faudrait changer et pas perpétuer la question, l'image du colon blanc et en sortir carrément. Oui, tout en, bien sûr, il faut continuer à faire appel à des partenariats, gagnant là où il faut, mais que ça ne soit pas systématiquement un blanc qui vient vous faire un projet, my God, d'agriculture. Non.
Donc avec ces images très fortes, hein, dignes de western, on passe à la question suivante, je vous en prie.
Merci bien. Moi, je m'appelle Zahabi Oulsidi Mohammed, ancien ministre des Affaires étrangères du Mali, ancien fonctionnaire des Nations Unies et qui a beaucoup travaillé sur les pays en conflit dans le cadre de différentes médiations. Ma question, c'est que j'étais très ravi d'écouter ce panel qui est composé d'experts dans un domaine très spécialisé, les mines, la souveraineté minière. Mais ma question à cette auguste assemblée serait un peu provocatrice quelque part. Parce que quand vous regardez tous ces conflits, j'ai travaillé dans beaucoup de pays en conflit en Afrique, tous ces pays où il y a des conflits, c'est autour des ressources minières. Et ça ne se dit pas, hein? Vous regardez les résolutions des Nations Unies, les sanctions, tout ça, mais on ne parle jamais de l'essentiel. L'essentiel, c'est quoi? C'est cette souveraineté minière. Je prends un pays sur lequel je travaille actuellement, l'est de la RDC, dans les deux Kivu, où il y a une guerre qui a plus de 30 ans. Vous regardez la zone Liptako-Gourma aussi au Sahel, où il y a un conflit qui est là, qui est en train de se développer. Mais tout ça, si vous regardez, il y a des multinationales qui travaillent, qui exploitent. C'est-à-dire qu'il y a la guerre, mais ça ne gêne en rien l'exploitation des ressources. Et j'ai posé la question à des gens, j'ai dit, mais vous n'avez pas peur de l'insécurité? Il y a l'insécurité ici, qu'est-ce que vous faites ici? Mais on vous dit non, l'insécurité, on peut la gérer. Mais ce qui est triste, c'est que quelqu'un ici a parlé des terres rares. Et ces terres rares, par exemple, l'Est de la RDC, le conflit dure 30 ans. Il se régionalise, il y a de la déstabilisation, chacun accuse l'autre, tu entretiens des rebelles sur ton territoire qui me déstabilisent. Mais au fond, l'exploitation du cobalt, de toutes ces terres rares, ça continue et les gens les achètent. Les Chinois sont là, bon, je ne veux pas les indexer particulièrement, mais j'ai visité les terrains. Vous avez une multitude d'entreprises qui travaillent, qui exploitent, qui exportent, et jamais les sanctions ne sont portées sur ceux qui achètent ces produits-là, y compris l'Union européenne. Hein. Ils sont aussi partis. Hein. Et je sais de quoi je parle, franchement. Donc, quand vous regardez, est-ce qu'on veut réellement mettre fin à ces conflits-là? Quelle est la raison qui fait que quand il s'agit de ces terres rares qui produisent aujourd'hui des plus-values extrêmes, tout le monde ferme les yeux et on ne veut pas savoir d'où ça vient. Mais pourtant, tout le monde sait d'où ça vient.
Alors justement, pardon.
Je n'ai pas de réponse, mais je voudrais savoir, avec tous ces experts qui sont là, est-ce qu'il y a un non-dit que nous autres profanes, on ne doit jamais savoir? Point d'interrogation, merci.
Merci beaucoup. Sanctions sur les compagnies minières. Qui veut justement? Allez-y, Chris.
I was just going to ask if I could do some closing remarks before the end of the meeting. I don't think, I want to make sure his question was answered.
Ok, on va passer par des questions. Chaque intervenant va conclure. Allez-y, une dernière question.
It's a temptation. In a positive mood, you in Mali, in Senegal, you have much more sovereignty than one state in the European Union in this moment. It's just to perform a good policy. You have your instruments and you have your deficits. So be clever and be smart to contract a good company, consultancy company, for the best management of this or that. And then you have the international treaties, and you have your army to say, I want this, I don't want this, I stop this. This is political will. But please swing and work in the interdependence world. And to be full sovereign is to be very poor in these times of interdependence. Do you have a mobile phone? I suppose that you have a mobile phone. Do you have one of these? Do you have mobile? Yes, American with rare lands from another part, made in China. We are in the interdependence world. So to manage to rule a country nowadays is to have self-confidence, to be transparent, to be clear about corruption, and to have a penal code about this, and then to contract the best, and I conclude here. Your countries have more sovereignty than European Union countries. Use it.
Thank you very much. We unfortunately do not have time for the question because I have to give 1 minute for every panelist to address the panel. And there are other panels tomorrow where we can address this question. Keep in mind that this is a panel session where actually questions to the audience. On a 10 minutes, on est 10, comment on fait?
Merci, monsieur le modérateur. Je suis Hassan Saoudi, chercheur à l'Institut royal des études stratégiques. Souveraineté, je ne sais plus ce que ça signifie dans une mondialisation où les États individuels n'ont plus grand-chose à dire. Madame, le docteur Bouzaid a dit que le colonialisme est parti. Il est parti par la fenêtre et il est rentré par la porte à la recherche des matières premières. Et quand Sa Majesté le Roi a parlé au sommet Europe-Afrique de la colocalisation des entreprises, ben c'est les Occidentaux qui ont tiqué. On ne peut pas bâtir une économie africaine sur la matière première. Comment créer les emplois? Et après, on se demande pourquoi il y a une immigration vers l'Occident. Donc, il faut cesser quand même d'inventer écoutez, l'Afrique, Forum Chine-Afrique, Corée du Sud-Afrique, Inde-Afrique, je ne sais, Turquie-Afrique, tout le monde vient pour l'Afrique, pour ses matières premières, et en échange, on leur vend des armes, et on continue à dire pourquoi l'Afrique est instable. Pensez-y, s'il vous plaît, parce qu'on est en train de parler de choses qui n'existent pas. L'Afrique a besoin de se prendre en charge elle-même, mais elle a besoin quand même d'une colocalisation des entreprises pour que les énergies africaines puissent travailler, pas venir là piller les richesses africaines dont les minerais rares dont l'Occident a besoin, et l'Afrique restera comme ça si on ne change pas de logiciel.
Ces mots. Alors, je vais donner malheureusement que 30 secondes à chacun des intervenants sur un point qu'ils aimeraient conclure sur ce panel. Dr. Goppel.
Thank you. I will pick this up because I don't think it makes a lot of sense today to only think in national containers. As I mentioned in my first remark, we have a fight between companies that want to do better and the ones that don't really want to move so much as well. So how can particular regulation, for example, the Supply Chain Act, help improve conditions here because it safeguards certain standards of practice that will allow to really shed a light on which companies are better in improving standards here and which are the ones that might want to be weeded out. So it's not only a national thing, it cuts through different countries, because you do have ones pulling one direction or the other. And transnational corporations need to be held account. I don't think it can be one continent, even like Europe, doing it by itself.
Thank you very much. We move on. Jordi, 30 seconds.
It took the floor too much. From geopolitics of oil to geopolitics of rare land. So improve the governance of the countries, an open mind to the interdependence, and the positive benefits of this interdependence and clever vision of the future.
Thank you, Fabian.
think it's important to distinguish between legal sovereignty and effective sovereignty. And we live in a world where sovereignty is constrained, where also big powers are acting in different ways which affect all of us. So I would plea for a more pragmatic approach where we actually resolve the issues which are there, including the global commons, which we have to resolve between us and not just in legal sovereignty terms.
Thank you.
Thank you. The issues around sovereignty need to be defined, and I think the gentleman from Senegal made some very interesting points. This is similar to what I said earlier about Zambia. The resources, Africans' resources, are being exploited by outsiders. Right now, the Chinese fishing fleet is sitting off your coast with 300 ships, siphoning off all your fishing resources, and the Russian fleet is now sitting off the same coast, 200 miles within your economic zone. How is that? How does that benefit you, right? So understanding where those resources are being used and defining the rights of African countries to use them to their advantage, I think is something that should be defined clearly, publicly. So the idea of sovereignty is understood well. It's right now it's a quite unclear term. And the other thing I would say, the resilience, defining resilience can be done through workshops. You know, I want to give practical suggestions for what Africa can utilize. Having stress testing for the food system, for resourcing, for the energy system is hugely valuable. And agrivoltaics, I'll say one more time, we're developing an initiative for Africa under the G7. Take a look at last year's Pescara Declaration, paragraph 25. There is ample justification for developing the agrivoltaic market in Africa. We're going to help develop that.
Thank you. If you can pass on the mic, 30 seconds if possible.
Well, for economic resilience, I believe the best thing that we can do is to focus on our inter-regional trade. Our inter-regional trade can only be achieved when our regional economic are unified. If we don't have unification between our regional economic communities, we cannot achieve that. And absolutely, for us to realize the integrated industrialization, it can be through unified inter-regional trade.
I can but echo what my brother had just said. I am a strong believer in regional integration of a regional approach, and Africa has everything it needs, whether in terms of people, even funding and investment, even technologies. We can always import technologies, but unless we bring this regional dimension, actively seek the within Africa partnerships and approach the matter in a unified way, we're not going to succeed. And by the way, even for an investor point of view, it presents itself as an opportunity for investment at scale instead of this fragmented way of doing business. So I invite everybody to think and rethink the way they do they approach any sector, and make sure that it's regional. Put aside some rivalries for now, and the world cannot afford to continue each one on his or her own.
I want to pick up where the gentleman from Senegal left off. I think in terms of sovereignty, it's the power of saying no. Power of saying no is going to be really key for the African continent to move forward. But we also have to harmonize our standards. We have to be able to try and bring something that we haven't done over the last 100 years. And we don't really want to be, and this is the final point because I don't want to be too long, we don't want to be the continent that dug up the 21st century and didn't benefit from it. So that's the framing for all of our conversations to move forward. We have to think of the old ways of colonizing. When I said, opening up one of these pipelines and finding the British Empire, we don't want to find the new empires. We don't want to find the new corporations there either. So having the power to say no is the way to also frame that conversation about your sovereignty.
Well, just to conclude, we have another opportunity. The European Commission has come out with the new pact for Mediterranean, and I think that the Northern African countries can be a bridge to Sahel countries, to sub-Saharan countries, and especially, Maghreb countries, because Egypt is a Mashriq. So I think we can look into some new partnership in the future.
Thank you very much, Franz, for the concluding words.
Yes, while these big questions about geopolitical influence and how much sovereignty in the international scene are certainly important, I think what every African country or every country in the world has in its hand, if you think you have minerals somewhere, go there, drill, test, start small before talking about like huge international projects, because that's in your power, and the other thing is hard to change.
Merci beaucoup encore une fois à l'ensemble de nos panélistes. Je vais vous demander des applaudissements pour leur contribution et des applaudissements pour vous-même pour vos questions. Merci encore.